This is all for informational purposes. None of this is to be considered legal advice. I am not an attorney, and more importantly, I am not your attorney. So if you
There
have
we
a
go.
specific practice situation, you should find an attorney or advisor familiar with your state and your practice situation.
Love it.
Not like I've
Love
ever said that before, right?
it.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dental Office Managers Community Podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter most and help us to become better leaders in our dental practice. I'm your host, Kyle Summerford. Let's dive right in.
Kara, thanks so much for coming on. You and I had spoke a couple weeks ago, and we kind of got to know each other, learned a little bit more about you myself, and so I wanted to bring you on this webinar so that we can, just kind of share your background information with members of our community. You are what I call the expert in HR. And so, you have participated in the group and you've been very helpful. And so that's kind of why I brought you on here today. So thanks for coming on and joining me here.
Well, thanks for the invite. I'm really happy to be here. I enjoyed our conversation as well and getting to know you better. And I've loved being a member of the group. So I'm happy to help and provide any information that I can.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and, what your company's about. Just share a little bit more.
Sure. Well, I actually consider myself a dental HR consultant. I've been working with dental practices since 2012. I got my start working in dentistry at a CPA firm that served dental and small medical practices. Of all things, doing marketing whenever I first started. I was in school still, finishing up my HR degree, have a business degree with a concentration in human resource management. And I thought that I was going to go work somewhere for a little while and finish my degree and go, join the corporate world and be an HR coordinator or generalist or manager, work my way up some corporate. Yeah, none of that happened. I landed at a dental CPA firm and kind of fell in love with dentistry and fell in love with HR advisory for dentistry. And over the 7.5 or so years that I was there, I built myself into a role of an HR and business development consultant, doing everything from employee handbooks and employee relations advisory to drafting business plans so that practices could secure funding for new locations, all of those fun things. So I have a very broad business background when it comes to dentistry. And
Cool.
right before the pandemic, I decided that I was tired of being mistaken for an accountant. I set up an LLC because I wanted to do some more speaking and educating and helping practices really get their HR systems in place. And I thought that I was really going to do speaking, training, and education. And then boom, we had March of 2020. And I did a complete 360 right back to being a consultant. And I did a lot of
Okay.
speaking that year on FFCRA, Family First Coronavirus Response Act, if we all remember that. Did a lot of educating that year, but I also more or less really gained a fantastic client base. I met a lot of people, connected with a lot of people like yourself, and really built myself, I think, out a firm that I really love and enjoy and a group that I love serving.
Cool. Yeah. The pandemic, right? We all remember that.
Is
We
that
all
still a
lived through
thing?
it.
Are we
Yeah.
still recovering from that?
I know. When I think about it, I'm like, to think back to 2020, it's kind of odd because it's 2024, right? But to me, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. It almost feels like it was a couple months ago, right? Like,
It
I mean, that's
does
how I.
on some level, and then on others, it feels like it's been years and years and years.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, things have changed, hopefully for the better, right?
It is.
We've all lived through it, and we're all still here. Thank God. So, but yeah, HR. So let's talk a little bit about HR. You are the HR expert, and so we do get questions in the group from time to time, but I do have a few questions myself
Sure.
that I would love to get your expert opinion. Don't worry. I understand the whole HR legal thing. So,
Yes, I do. I
I'm
have to
not
read my
gonna.
disclaimer. This is all for informational purposes. None of this is to be considered legal advice. I am not an attorney, and more importantly, I am not your attorney. So, if you
There
have
we
a
go.
specific practice situation, you should find an attorney or advisor familiar with your state and your practice situation.
Love it.
Not like I've
Love
ever
it.
said that before, right?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, we won't. I won't sue you. No worries. So the question, one of the questions I have is, and this is something I've experienced myself, where as an office manager, the doctor, the dentist will give you authority, right? And authority can sometimes be undermined. And so my question, and I'm not 100% sure if this falls under HR, but my thinking is it might. But if you have an employee who refuses to agree to a new office policy, right? Um, and just refuses to sign anything that you put in and say, hey, look, um, this is a new policy and everyone else in the office is agreeing with it. What would you do? Like, how do you approach something like that? Because it's a little disheartening because it's like, hey, everyone else is okay with this policy. But like, what are the specifics? Does it have to be like, is it dependent on the policy? Is it dependent? Like, there's so many questions I have, and I don't want to shoot them all at you at once. But give me a little bit of expert advice here.
Okay, so that's a lot to unpack, but let's start first of all with the first part that you brought up as far as you have authority and sometimes it gets undermined. The first thing you need in place when you have authority as a practice manager or practice leader is the authority of the owner. Like they need to actually be backing you. I've seen a number of practices where, yes, the office manager wants to roll out a new policy and the employees don't like it. So they go talk to the owner and the owner just shuts it down. If they're not going to back you, there's no way you can be effective as a leader. Not no way. There's very little way you can be effective as a leader if you don't have the backing of the person who owns the practice and the person who signs the paychecks, whether they're on site or not. They have to have that trust and faith in you, and that has to be conveyed to the team. They need to actually be pushing back and on team members that come and do that and say, this is something you need to take up with our office manager. This is something that's in their purview. If there's a problem, I'm happy to have a conversation with y'all later, but please take it to them first. So that's the first thing. The second that you asked was really about kind of what the policy is and what happens if they don't want to sign it. And anytime I deal with this type of situation, I look at the things you can do or have to do, the things you can't do, and then the things that you can do but probably shouldn't. So looking at the things that you can do for the situation, you can actually say, depending on the policy, this is something that's going to be, your future employment is contingent upon you signing this. It's contingent upon you agreeing to abide by this policy. So we can actually decide that you are refusing to comply with company policies, and we can actually terminate you for this or discipline you for this, for your refusal to follow certain policies. Now, can do, but probably shouldn't is really where that actually lands. That's not going to go over well with most employees, and not just with the employee who's refusing to sign, but with the team members who are also watching, because they do discuss their working conditions. They do have conversations. It does come out eventually. So depending on what that policy is, it may be something that you want to have a conversation with that employee who's refusing to sign this policy, refusing to abide by that policy. Why are they refusing to? Let's get to the bottom of this. Is there a concern that they have about the policy? Do they feel like it's violating some protected right of theirs? Does it feel like it's infringing on a certain culture or background, or somehow that they can't comply to it? We all have had those really bad bosses that try to put in those policies that that nobody should be following. And so maybe they are actually defending their position. If it's somebody who has a license, for example, and the policy is something that's asking them to violate what they know to be wrong under the state board or under their license, that's a valid concern. And if you want to terminate somebody for that or discipline somebody for that, for raising those types of concerns, that can come back at you. But if it's something more like, we want to have you put your cell phone on silent during the day or not be on it while you're on the clock all day, every day, and they're refusing, well, okay, let's find the why. Maybe they have a child at home who's got a medical condition or a parent that they're caring for. Is there a reason why they want to have their phone on them or they're on it consistently? It may not be a good reason to you, but let's see what they say first of all and see what their perspective is, and see if we can maybe coach them as to why we feel this is a valid policy and a good policy. Not just saying, well, everybody else signed it, you need to as well, but this is why we all have agreed as a team, we're going to follow this policy.
I see.
Now, the caveats to that, you asked, there might be some dependent upon the policy. If it's like, for example, something concerning wages. So, for example, if you decided that we're going to have a training rate where all CE is done at a certain percentage of your actual hourly rate, which you can do in most cases, but they have to agree to do that. And if you have somebody like a hygienist who is getting paid $60 an hour, and you're trying to tell them that they have to do CE for $20 an hour, or training or meeting time or something for $20 an hour, they can refuse that. They have to agree to work for those wages. And then that's a different conversation. But just kind of saying, yes, you have to sign it is not going to go over very well, because you're actually changing the terms of the job when you're asking them to do something like that.
Got it. So yes. Okay, that's great. Since you brought up two other points, right? I heard you say mobile. I heard you say mobile phone, right? That struck a little chord in my head. And then I also heard you talk about training for, staff training and getting paid for training. I think those are two definitely hot topics, hot commodities, whatever you want to call them, that I've heard and I've seen and I've dealt with. So let's talk a little bit more about the mobile phone policy, because phones are everywhere. We just can't get off of them, myself included, right? But that's definitely something I would like to touch on a little bit. So mobile phone policies, what are your thoughts on it?
Absolutely. In general, I would love to assume that we all hire adults, and that adults are there to do the job that they're supposed to do, and that they're going to stay off their phone when they're on the clock, unless there's a real reason for them to be on it. And in reality, we all know that that is not 100% the case 100% of the time. I have seen practices run the gamut, honestly, of different types of policies regarding cell phones. Some are on the more lax side of, we know they're here. We know it's going to be something that they're going to keep in their pocket. I can tell them all day long until I'm blue in the face that they need to lock it up with their purse, but they're not going to do it. So it's okay if they keep it on them, as long as they're not doing it in front of a patient, as long as they're not using it for any confidential information or for any patient information, like it's not a HIPAA violation, whatever they're doing with their phone. And as long as they're really working during work time, and we're focusing on the results of that, are they getting their work done in the time that I've allowed them? And if that's not the case, then we have that one-on-one conversation at that point. Those are my favorite kind of practices, to be honest. Like I said, the ones that treat people like adults, versus the whole micromanaging kind of approach that actually order on some legal issues for you. And again, not an attorney, but I will say we have the other end of that spectrum of practices that are like, well, if they've decided not to be on their phone, then I'm not going to let them bring them into the practice. Or I still see some practices from time to time that will say things like, oh, we pass around a basket in the beginning of the day, and then they put their phone in that, and we just take up their phone until the end of the day. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what high school are you working at? My kid's high school doesn't even do that, actually, to that note. Aside from the fact that that is definitely extreme on the micromanaging, it actually can end up violating their protected rights under National Labor Relations Act. And so that's like an 85-year-old law that still applies to a lot of situations for us. And is the ability to communicate effectively to unionize, which, that's a whole other topic in and of itself, but they have to be able to communicate and have access to their communication devices during the day. And when you tell them that they can't have their phone on practice premises, you may end up with a suit from NLRB, which is National Labor Relations Board, for unfair workplace practices.
Wow.
So that is
I did not know that. I didn't know that. Oh,
that is a whole other issue.
Really? Wow.
Usually we have, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I remember, okay, I'm not sure the time period or school, what they did in schools when you were younger, right? But when I was younger, and I think we're probably maybe close around the same time in age, when I went to school, they would take away your hat. They would take away, your electronic calculator. Like, it was like, you couldn't have it back until the end of the day, or you didn't get it back at all. So like that's wow, really, mobile phones. I didn't know that.
Yes. So most practices, I feel, fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. The rule of what I like to share with practices, or one of the guidelines I like to put in place, is that you don't set blanket policies because you've got one or two people who can't follow the rules. So a lot of the policies I see in handbooks are because they had really one or two people that were causing the problem. And instead of actually having that conversation with those people, potentially disciplining those people, potentially terminating if they really can't stay off their phone, if they're really not getting their work done because they're busy on social media or whatever it is that they're doing on their phone all day, talking to boyfriends and all the other fun things that I hear about. If you really can't have that conversation with them, what they end up doing is they create this blanket policy for everybody. And so you've got people who are easily trusted and responsible adults that you've hired that now are under this policy just because you couldn't bring yourself to have that conversation. So if you're going to put a policy in place, first of all, it needs to be consistent across the board as best possible. And second of all, you need to actually hold people accountable to it on an individual level and not just double down on everything because you've got one people who aren't following.
So you should have the policy in place from the beginning of time.
Yes, based on what you feel is best for your practice. Like I said, there's a spectrum of this. Most tend to say, we would prefer it be up or at least out of sight of patients. I have practices that are like, we've got messaging software and we text each other all day long. So there's no way to not have their phone on them. So really, it just depends on your practice culture. But whatever you're going to do, be consistent about it, and don't let a couple of bad apples ruin the bunch. Don't let a couple of negative people lead your policy drafting.
So do you remember when they used to take away things like that in school?
Oh, yes. No, cell phones, not so much, because I'm of the age where we maybe got them like in high school or more started to have them in high school. Now, my Gen Z kids that I'm raising, they've had kids with phones since like elementary. And yes, they did get taken up. And you might get it back at the end of the day, or you might have to have your parent come and get it for you.
Right. Yeah. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't even have a beeper. I don't think I had a beeper. I had a beeper later, but not in school. But
you're older than I am. We didn't have beepers.
You didn't have beeper? You didn't have beepers?
No, we didn't have beepers. I know what they are. My parents had beepers, but I don't know anybody.
Your parents had beepers. Oh my God, I feel so old now. Okay. All right. Yeah, I had a beeper. Unfortunately, I was part of that generation. All right, cool. So yeah, all right, awesome. Thanks. Thanks for giving me the guidance and things like that on the mobile phones. You definitely brought a lot of information. So I feel enlightened. Now let's touch a little bit on the whole staff training, getting paid for training, sitting there watching training videos. Should they get paid? Should they be doing this on their lunch break? What's the deal with that?
Oh, let me get my slides. This is actually one of my favorite, what I call myths that I keep seeing in dental Facebook groups. I have literally built an entire presentation that I deliver as a keynote or a training or breakout session under Fair Labor Standards Act, which is a federal rule, which means it applies to every person in every practice in every state. Now, your state may have something that's in addition to, but this still applies to everybody. Under Fair Labor Standards Act, non-exempt employees should be paid for all time spent in training. Now, if they're going to be unpaid for something, it has to meet 4 different standards. Okay, the first one is that it's voluntary, and that's the thing that I see so frequently is, oh, well, if you make it optional, you don't have to pay them. No, that's not really how that works. This is one of 4 that it has to meet, is that it has to be voluntary. They cannot be retaliated against for not attending. It can't be made mandatory. You can't require them to be there, which my argument to that on some of these is if you, the practice, have paid for their CE, you kind of expect them to show up. And so it's not really voluntary at that point. You would be a little upset if they decided to not go last minute.
Right.
But anyway, even if this is truly voluntary, the second is that it has to be outside of working hours. And so they're looking at, working hours being, your 8 to 5, Monday through Thursday. Depending on the state, they may even look at it on the Friday, 8 to 5 or Saturday 8 to 5 or something like that. So it has to be completely outside of working hours. The next one is that it has to have no productive work completed. So you can't be working on something for the practice. If you're going to a training on marketing videos and you're creating a marketing video that's going to get put on social media that new patients are going to potentially see and come in, that's productive work. And then the last one is the one that I think we all forget about, is that it has to not be job related for it to be free time. If it's a rep coming in for a lunch and learn, for them, they're bringing in lunch and they're sharing something about whatever software or mouthwash flavors or whatever your lunch and learns are on with your team, that's job related. If you're taking them to a dental conference, that's job related. Dental people going to a dental conference, yeah, that's job related. So
sounds like it.
I know you paid for the conference, and I know you paid for the travel and for the hotel and for the meals while they're there. I get it. And I get that this is expensive, but it is an investment in your team. And I would rather have, you make that investment and have team members who are trained versus not, versus deciding that it's too expensive. But you do have to actually pay for that time. So like that, it has to meet all 4 of those standards. So a sip and paint after work on a Friday evening that they don't have to go to, unpaid time. The dinner after the conference can be unpaid time as long as they're not required to be there. They're not doing any productive work. You're not holding a team meeting, presumably, and it is voluntary. So that can be unpaid time, but any time actually spent in training does need to be paid for non-exempt employees. Now, that said, what I was mentioning earlier is a training rate. You can, in most cases, have a separate rate for training time. It's not my favorite thing to do, especially because some practices try to lower it all the way down to like minimum wage. Especially if you're doing it during a regular work hour, your team should not be taking a pay cut to go train. I know that, again, it's unproductive time and you're losing production and it is expensive, but your team should not be taking a pay cut. Like if I were given the choice of making, 50% of what my salary was per hour to go to a training or just stay at the office at work, I'm going to stay at the office and work. Some of your team are paycheck to paycheck, as much as, that at the end of the day is not our problem. It's up to them to manage their money. They're paycheck to paycheck, and they're making a business decision for themselves whenever they choose not to go to training or choose not to accept a lower rate. So I am not a fan personally of doing that, but you can. The thing you have to remember if you're going to do a separate rate is that most states are going to require you to do a weighted overtime calculation if they go into overtime. So you end up paying more than you think you will anyway if you're paying them properly. And if you're not, well, I am available for the DOL audit.
So that should be, is that something that an office should have like written in a policy?
If you are going to pay them less than their hourly rate, I would highly recommend having that be a completely separate document that they sign an agreement to. Not only that, if you're changing the terms of their employment, you're changing their pay, you cannot do that retroactively. You have to give them time to accept. So you can't come back from conference week and decide, oh, I'm going to pay y'all a little bit less because we weren't really working this week, so I'm going to change their pay rate. That's not legal. So have them sign something in agreement in advance of the training that, yes, they do accept this lower rate for those training hours with any applicable overtime.
I see. Huh. Okay. So let's dive a little bit into like what are the biggest challenges that you see in dental practices? Like maybe give us the top one that you see often.
Oh my goodness, it's finding and retaining team members. Haven't you heard? We had a pandemic. We can't get people to save our lives sometimes. Oh my goodness. It is. It's finding and retaining team members. I'm still several years later. I know this was a problem, obviously during the pandemic and immediately following, but 4 years later, this still seems to be the number one issue is getting people to come in for interviews, getting people to stay longer. And depending on where the issue is in that process, I tend to like to kind of go through it with the practice whenever I work with them and kind of diagnose maybe what the issue is, because it's going to be a different issue if you get no one to apply for your job versus getting them not to show up versus getting them not to accept the job or not staying. Those are all different issues in a similar process, but we kind of lump it together and say, I just can't find good people. People just don't want to work anymore. Maybe, but in general, unemployment doesn't pay that well. And so most of them want to work. They just may not want to work for you, depending on your practice, depending on the culture, depending on the benefits that they're offered or not offered in some cases. There's a lot of reasons why people want to leave a job or don't want to accept the job or don't come back. And so it's very easy to say that they're just all entitled and nobody wants to work anymore and they're all just out to do this for unemployment. And that might be the case with some people, but it's a smaller percentage than we really think. And they're making, like I said, a business decision for themselves and their families, just as you are for your practice, or you should be at least thinking that way as an office manager. So there has to be a mutual benefit to that decision. Like I said, depending on where we're at in this process, there can be a lot of different reasons for not being able to find and retain top talent, but that does definitely seem to be probably the number one issue that I'm seeing.
Okay. So what are some other ways that practices are retaining their talent?
The ones that I have the least issues with, some of my favorite clients are the ones that I might see once or twice a year because they have a team that stays. They have a culture that people want to work for. They built a practice that people want to work for, one that's worth working for. A lot of it comes down to pay and benefits. I know everybody thinks that everyone's demanding the moon at this point, and in some cases that may be true, but when was the last time you went and checked market value for the salaries in your practice and actually compared apples to apples, what's actually out there? We want to fault our team for asking for a raise when they may actually be asking for something that they can get. If 5 other practices are offering them $3 an hour more, then that's reasonable for them to go and take it. So why are we not comparing that? I had a lot of questions, I think, in the last couple of years, whenever salaries were skyrocketing at a abnormal pace. It really was. I will certainly credit that. That seems to have leveled off a little bit. But they really were going far more over what market value that made actual sense. So like you would literally give somebody a raise to bump the market value, and then 3 months later it seemed like it was higher again. I really feel like that has leveled off just a bit. But I was having a lot of conversations during that time about, well, I'm hiring somebody for this position. I'm hiring a dental assistant, and I'm having to hire her at $5 an hour more than what my other assistants are making, and they've been with me for 2 years. What do I do? Well, if you want to keep those assistants, unfortunately, the answer is going to have to be find a way to increase their pay or find the way to level that out through bonuses or other means, because you having one person coming in at $5 an hour more, which is a pretty good percentage for a dental assistant, 10 to 20% more than what others are making, they're going to talk, and you can't prevent them from doing that. That's another one of my favorite myths that I see frequently in dental practices and in Facebook groups is, well, we just tell them they can't discuss their pay. We just fire them if they discuss their pay, or we discipline them, or we make a handbook policy that says they can't discuss their pay. National Labor Relations Act.
So what is the deal with that? What is the deal with that? I want to say it 3 times. What is the deal with that? Because I've seen that come up often. Like,
yes.
Are you allowed to discuss salaries? Are you not allowed to discuss salaries? What is the whole deal with that?
I will say it 3 times as well if I need to, because apparently I need to say it at least one more time for people in the back. You cannot prohibit your non-exempt employees from discussing pay. If you have actual supervisor level employees, you can prohibit them from discussing pay. But the majority of the employees in your practice, you cannot prohibit them from discussing their pay. That is a concerted protected right under National Labor Relations Act. You cannot make a policy about it. You cannot terminate them for it. And the pushback I'll see on the comments for these posts is, well, we're an at-will state. We can fire for any reason. No, you're an at-will state. You can fire for any reason. That's not an illegal reason. That would be one of the illegal reasons. So no, you cannot. You cannot discourage them from not talking about it. You cannot tell them not to. You can't write in a policy or make them sign anything to take away that particular right. They are allowed to discuss working conditions, and salary is a working condition. Now, that does not apply to them discussing each other's pay. So, for example, I had a practice back around Christmas of this last year that the doctor wrote the Christmas bonuses on a Post-it and left it on her desk. And she had based it on hourly rate. So one of the employees saw that and did the math and figured out what everybody was making. And she didn't say anything at the time. She waited till a couple months later when the doctor and the family were on vacation, and they were there, answering phones, doing training, doing the things you do whenever a doctor's out. And that employee was going around the office saying, I know how much money you make. That you can have an issue with. You can have a policy against that. Wow. They can't disclose other people's pay. But they can discuss their own.
I see. So two staff members could potentially discuss with each other
their own pay.
Correct. But someone else disclosing another staff's pay to someone else in the office is illegal. I guess you could say illegal, or it's just
can be it's not illegal. It can
be prohibited.
Yes, you can have a policy against them announcing other people's pay. So if you have a front desk person who happens to give you timesheets for payroll, and they happen to at some point figure out what it was that somebody was making, no, they can't go post it in the break room or announce it or say, well, I know how much this person's making.
Post it in the break room. Imagine that.
I've seen stranger.
Yeah. You got to share those. Maybe.
Oh, when you've seen the memes or the conversations about the HR person on their last day decides to print off everybody's salary and leave it sitting on the printer.
Yeah, I have. Oh my gosh. That's funny.
I mean, I've had, oh gosh, what was it? I've seen some interesting things in dentistry. I had a practice where their HR manager was sending the census information, the 401k census information out in an unencrypted, unprotected Excel spreadsheet. And she accidentally sent it to a former employee, a very disgruntled former employee. Yeah. It was not on purpose, but it did happen. And so that former employee had all of the information that you need for a 401k census, which is definitely sensitive information. So
no. I could imagine that was probably a mess.
Oh yeah, I've got stories.
All right. Well, listen, I'm glad you were able to jump on here and give us a little bit info. Help us out with your clinical HR expertise. It's always good to have an expert like you jump on and really provide some insight and guidance. So I just want to thank you for your time. What I also would like to do is if any of our members would like to get in touch with you, do you have a website?
Yeah, absolutely. It's clinicalhr.com. And you can reach me via email very easily, Kara, Kara at clinicalhr.com. Happy to answer
Kara, Kara, not Kara.
Kara, not Kara.
I made that mistake. All right, cool. Kara, what I'll do is I will share your website in the comments section of our webinar today. And I'll put the link there to your website. So if anyone wants to check out, and get in touch with you, they'll be able to do that. And, before we go, I do have one little thing I like to do at the end of each webinar. And it's something I just started doing recently. And I'm finding it's fun. It's a nice little thing. And, the last guest, what they do is they leave a question for the next guest. And then you'll do the same. You'll leave me a question privately, and we'll leave that for our next guest. So are you ready for the question?
Absolutely.
Okay. And this is, it's kind of funny because I'm reading the question and I'm reading and I'm just like, it's funny how this worked out, especially since you are in HR. So,
now I'm nervous.
Okay. All right. So here's the question. All right. Our last guest says, have you pretended you were sick to get out of something?
I'm HR. I actually don't get to do that. No, and quite honestly, I say these things about giving employees grace and whatnot, and I am the worst example of that. I have shown up to work with strep throat so bad the ENT prescribed me Dilaudid for pain because I knew that this client had booked this meeting like a month out, and I knew that it was going to be difficult to reschedule. So I showed up. I told them, I am so sorry I'm sick. I'm going to sit across the room. This was before COVID, so I didn't wear a mask. Sorry. Hope they didn't get sick. But I am that person with that work ethic of I'm just going to power through and make it happen. So yeah, I don't think I've ever pretended to be sick to get out of work or to get out of doing it, unfortunately.
Fair enough. You answered the question. So Kara, again, thank you so much for your time and really helping out the community with your expert guidance on HR. We're happy to have you here and look forward to maybe jumping on a future webinar with you at some point. I know you're busy, but maybe in the future we'll be able to get together again.
Anytime.
Cool. All right. Well, take care and we'll see you in the community. Bye.